So my experience of listening to Erin, besides also coming to tears and being inspired, was the same experience that I've had in times in trying to get people to be inspired by examples like Martin Luther King and other kinds of examples of people who have done extraordinary things. And the reaction I often get is, oh, well, they're special. They're different. I could never be like that. So, Erin, I'm interested in how you began. If you can take us back to how did you begin to think of yourself as a change agent instead of a teacher? Were there moments? Were there incidents? How do you think about that transition?
I think all teachers have the ability to be change agents. I think that we have lived in an era where teaching became very scripted, where mandates have made it very difficult for us to take risks. But I like to think I'm a maverick. I like to think I think outside the box. I quickly learned how to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, which is often probably terrifying for a lot of you administrators in the room. I apologize. I was terrified of even the power structure in our school systems. And I remember the first time I met my superintendent. The Claremont folks know him well, Dr. Carl Cohen. But for me, he was larger than life, and I was terrified of him. And what I was able to do was to invite him into our classroom and to see all of the things that we were doing firsthand, be reminded of why you're in this profession. And when I did, he said, I'm going to pick up the phone, and I'm going to call the president of the board, Karen Polachek. And so suddenly I have the superintendent and the president of our board walking into my classroom in a school district where there's 97,000 kids. And it was terrifying, and I am terrified at this moment. So I don't think the terror ever left me in this profession, but terror can be a really great motivating factor of trying to do the right thing, to ask for help, to humble yourself and say, I don't have the answers, to dare to dream and say, how am I going to figure this out? So I didn't think I was a change agent. I just knew that I was desperate enough, and desperate times call for desperate measures.
What did you try that didn't work, and how did that feel?
A lot of what I did initially was trying to bring books to life. If we read this story, how do we put a face on it? If we read this poem, how is it relevant? So a lot of that was incorporating what I knew was pop culture. How do I find the perfect documentary to show? How do I find the perfect movie? How do we go somewhere like the Museum of Tolerance? What was hard for me is I would ask for help, and I would be told no, but I wanted to go anyways. So I had to figure out, okay, how do we do it on a Saturday or Sunday? How do I coerce my friends and family to drive? How do I pay for this? So I went out and got extra jobs. So I think that if I had known to ask Carl at the beginning, I wouldn't have had to do that on a Saturday or have 3 extra jobs or max out my credit cards because it's hard to be a teacher. We don't make the money we should. So I wish I didn't have to do those things to pay for that field trip, to pay for that book. I don't have any regrets about us doing those things. It just got really hard on my personal life.
Well, what about your relationship with your peers, with the other teachers in the school? I mean, what you were doing must have been really threatening and challenging to them. How did that work?
I had an open door policy, so I was always asking people, I need chaperones, can you come? And I had a great cadre, and to this day still do, of folks that are willing to go that extra mile. There were others that were also intimidated. I think that some of the kids that they had were responding differently in room 203 than in their classroom. And so that made it kind of adversarial. So I stopped going to the teacher's lounge at one point and kind of almost hid in my room because I was afraid of the things that they were going to say about my students or even the things that they were going to say about me. So I felt a little isolated. I felt lonely. But I realized at one point I'm not running for Miss Congeniality at the teacher's lounge. I'm a teacher. So by opening up my classroom, and I realized I probably was hiding, it became a safe refuge for my students who were also hiding. And so ironically, the classroom became this very organic place where kids came in and did their homework, or they stayed after school, and when those bells rang and it was time to leave, they didn't want to leave. So by chance, that place became a place where we all felt that it was a no-hate zone. No one was going to get bullied. No one was going to get dissed. No one was going to get punked. You could say what you need to say in this place, but while you're in this place, it is a sacred place.
Was there any outward conflict with teachers or administrators? I mean, did you end up in getting pushback that was explicit? And what did that look like, and how did it feel?
Yes, there was a lot. Unfortunately, teachers would say horrific things about me.
To your face, anyway.
No, well, to my face, but also in a classroom to other students. So my students would come in, and one of them came in crying and said, my teacher said you're having an affair with Carl Cohen. Which is just libel and defamation of character and couldn't be further from the truth. And as a woman, that's a hard thing whenever you're trying to ascend. To bring like sexuality into anything is a devastating way to demoralize a woman and take away their power. So to have it even floated or referenced or even stated so obviously was really devastating. So there was all kinds of innuendos. There was things that were said very overtly. I had my students for 4 years, and that was not the program at Wilson High. Looping was not something we ever did. So every year I had to fight to keep them from their freshman year to their sophomore year to their junior to their senior year. And I fought to keep them together for those 4 years.
How did you do that? I mean, because I think if I can get you to get down into the weeds, because these folks here are all trying to figure out how to fight better. So how did you fight successfully? What did you do?
I think I wanted to fight fair.
Yeah.
So I was not somebody who would go toe-to-toe with someone.
That's a real handicap.
Okay. So I realized I don't have power. I am a teacher. As a brand new teacher, I didn't have tenure. So I didn't even have job security. But I had my kids. So I tried everything I could. I went to school board meetings and stood and pleaded my case. I had parents who never came to those back-to-school night meetings come. And we made them a cadre, and we called them the Dream Team Moms. And they wrote letters, and they called in multiple languages, Khmer and Spanish, etc. I set up meetings with my superintendent, which was scary because I realized I'd have to go to the district office and sit in his office and sweat and squirm and be terrified that he could say no.
Going over your principal?
Yes. Well, I went to my principal, and he said no.
Yeah. So you went over his or her head?
Yeah.
And did you tell the principal that you were
I did. I was very honest. I was very honest.
Beforehand or afterhand?
After.
After.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean after he said no, but before I met with Carl.
Yeah.
So I didn't I wasn't sneaky. I mean, I'm subversive. I'm not sneaky.
I'm not sure I know the difference, but go ahead.
Okay. And maybe there's not. I just, for me, when I was told no and it didn't feel logical, there didn't seem to be a reason. If it was a logical reason, I would have been like, I tap out, I'm cool. There wasn't a reason. The same teachers who were badgering me were also putting down my students, so I thought, what, you don't want them, you just don't want to teach a lower grade. So what I was doing is I would ascend from 9th to 10th to 11th to 12th. I would disrupt teaching schedules. Someone who had taught 12th might have to teach 11th, or someone who taught 10th might have to teach 9th. And that was something that the teachers were fighting. They didn't want to teach something that wasn't in their wheelhouse.
Could you tell us, we only have a couple of minutes left, can you tell us the moment that you felt most discouraged and how you kept your optimism under those circumstances?
Yes, I showed you a clip with Maria and Anne Frank, and I had students who were always getting forms to go off to a rally if they were a cheerleader, or to a football, basketball, or baseball game if they were an athlete, and they would miss several periods. My students had this idea that they were going to write to the woman who saved Anne Frank. She was 87 years old. She had been a simple secretary during the war, and her name was Miep Gies. And rather than writing a book report, they wanted to write letters to her showcasing how they felt that life in Long Beach was similar and or different to Anne. And we sent them to her like a message in a bottle. And we raised money. And she read those letters. And even though there was typos and even though there was grammar mistakes, I have to believe, or maybe I just want to believe, that she saw something in my kids that she saw in Anne Frank. So she said yes. She said she was going to come. And when she said she was going to come, and I said we had raised money, up until that point, we'd only raised $18. So I thought, holy shit, how do we pay for this? And my kids have PhDs of the streets, they're hustlers. So we figured out ways to raise money. And we raised the money, and she was going to come. And we had no place to put her. And so we ended up going to this dilapidated community center that was across the street. And we walked in, and there was graffiti on every wall. And I felt demoralized because I thought, we're bringing this woman from Amsterdam. And I just grabbed butcher paper and pins, and I grabbed Guillermo and Jaime and Ramon. I said, transform this room. And in that glorious moment, it became like the modern museum of art. Welcome signs, and then they wanted to feed her because they thought that plain food must suck, and they were going to go home and stand in those kitchens with mamas and aunties making tamales, making mean sweet potato pie, making some kind of fabulous Cambodian rice dish. And on the day that she was going to come, my principal said we had 45 minutes. 45 minutes. And when that bell rang, they better head across the street and go back to class. And I thought, didn't he read the book? Didn't he know that my kids just made these signs and they made these tamales and they are dressed up like they are heading to a pulpit, like they're Sunday finest? In their mind, this was bigger than the MTV Music Awards. We didn't have a moon man, we didn't have a red carpet, but we had meat geese. My principal didn't even come. And she spoke, and we cried, and the bell rang, and no one wanted to get up. No one wanted to leave. Every single one of them felt like this is civil disobedience. I can get suspended because I want to hear what she has to say. I'm willing to take it. And I just thought, what do? Do I send them back? And I didn't. And each and every kid got to hug her. They got their book signed. They got a suspension. But I will tell you, sometimes it's worth it because my students this year, they met John Lewis. They met John Lewis, who's been arrested 44 times, and he said, sometimes you gotta get into trouble. And on that day, my kids got into trouble. And I think it was worth it.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.